Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Option webinar series. My name is Vivek Bhatnagar. I am a CTO and founder for UnifyCloud. So let's look at now start looking at like 5 discipline of a of a cloud governance. And the first thing first I want to talk about resource consistency. And this is the one which is like I think one of the most important principle of building the cloud governance. And it is nothing but to ensure that all your resources are consistently configured so that they can be found easily by corporate inventory programs. They can be also included into recovery solutions, and they can be onboarded as a code onto cloud. And again, like we have a standard way of building these governance policies. We actually we document in a specific way templates. We found out business risk, and these business risks are very connected to resource consistency. So if we, for example, think about if you don't have a consistent resources, what will happen to what business risk it will pose, and how do you find that, and then how can you mitigate those things. There are steps like how you can get mature into these things, but it is just like a maturity part of it. So this is just one example of one of the resource consistency sample policy statement, and this is about monitoring. So again, thinking in the same mind frame that if you lack a monitoring part in your infrastructure, so there's a technical risk that improperly implemented or inconsistent monitoring will basically prevent like detection of any issues or health issues with any of the assets, and that may violate multiple or one policies. So this is a technical risk, and the policy statement, which is how we mitigate this, that will actually we have a governance policy that all assets of monitoring should be reported for depletion, security compliance, and optimization, or we can validate the state of any of the assets. And then potential design option, how do you enforce those policy statement? How do you measure is Azure Monitor provide you services? So Azure Monitor can monitor your asset and give you alert in case it's changing its state. Or you can use Azure Blueprint, which will always create those assets in a consistent way. So this is just one example of resource consistency policies, but you can create multiple such policies. Just a very high level view of these policies. For example, like all deployed assets must be categorized by criticality and data classification. Subnet should be defined in certain ways. You have a governance tooling which can audit the state of a assets, or you can have a tool to validate the appropriate level of loggings and other thing happening or not. So these are the sample policies that actually follow to or link to a resource consistency. And you can always use Azure Blueprint to create the governance minimum viable product MVP. And this is just you can actually consolidate all your policies into a blueprint and then deploy it. And there is an environment which is listed here with the main components of other services. But like these are the core infrastructure services that you will be deploying to have your complete governance framework in place. So log analytics, security center, Key Vault, Active Directory, and Azure policy with the storage account. Okay, the next discipline of governance is always cost. Like how do we do the cost optimization? And this is again a very important aspect of cloud, because cost looked at by different people different way. Like management team look the cost savings as a way to increase their revenues and reach and other things. Then finance team work on ROI and TCO numbers, and app team try to reduce the cost of their application deployment in the cloud. So it's a lot more places the costing impact. And typical way of implementing costing is proper tagging your resources and tagging your resources for their cost, criticality, and other aspect of thing. And it is like also like applied into the same way. So if you want to build a cost management policy, the same 6 steps. Here you need to find out risk for your cost management discipline. and then do the indicators to find that out, and then write down the policies to achieve those things. Just again, a sample, for example, budget overrun is one of the risk area identified. The risk is that it will there you may end up overspending more than budget, and so to mitigate that, the policy statement is that each deployment unit should be have a billing unit or budget and should not be allowed to basically cross that limit. And you can always use Azure Cost Management as a service. This service will allow you to put together a budget for each resource as multiple levels. You can put a subscription level, and you can put also resource group levels, and then monitor the budget accordingly. It will send you alert in case you have consumed, for example, 80% or 90% of budget. You can set that level. Again, there is another cost management policy of underutilization, and the business risk is that that in case you have prepaid for cloud services, for example, 3-year commitment, and you are not able to utilize those services, or for example, you have paid for 1,000 cores and you are using only 500 cores. So it is some sort of a lost investment. And how do you avoid this? So you can set like a lot of things. Like for example, the billing may be in place of just annually. Maybe it is like you will get billing like a monthly or quarterly, and it will adjust your budgets and all. In case there are a lot of unused resources in your subscription, other thing will be offered to other departments to use it. So it's kind of, you can also put together that not more than 20% things should be idle. So you can track these all things by policy statement. Again, you can use like Azure Cost Management or resource consistency models to adhere to, or to basically to apply a policy of underutilize. Just one more slide just to understand the Azure Cost Management, which is a very important service, and it connects to other services like management group, action group, advisors, resource arm template policy. So it has integration with all these other services of Azure, and in general help you in complete end-to-end cost management. So if you look at from the portal perspective, you can actually set up, you can look at complete cost management. And previously, Microsoft has some sort of enterprise portal for budgeting and costing, and then they acquired a company, Cloud9. Now, both of these things merge into Azure Cost Management. So this is now a single tool for doing your budgeting, for doing your alerting, for doing your cost analysis to find out where to stop and how much you are spending, and look at all those things. The important part is you can also export this data and analyze in Excel sheet, or you can use your own tools to understand where the cost is hitting your budgets and that thing. Some of the like sample policies to keep the cost in control. For example, definitely tagging is one of the must tagging. So every resource should be tagged for costing, for resource group, for subscription level. Plus, you can also tag every resource with their application owners and owners, so that in case of a cost overrun, you can send them information to change it. So these are the sample policies that will impact the costing. So let's talk about identity. Identity is another important discipline, and I think one of the little bit hard discipline to implement. And I recommend to discuss our identity very early in the project, because it is going to impact the time you are implementing. Because if customers say that they are not going a standard way of managing identity, which is Azure Active Directory in Microsoft Azure, if they are going for any custom identity solutions and other thing, it is going to take time, because then you have to integrate that custom solution to all your policies, to all your assets in that cloud. But if you use Azure Active Directory as a standard way of managing identity, it is already integrated, and then you just need to configure. So again, like implementing in a week or implementing in 7-8 weeks, that would be the difference. Again, the same 6 steps. Then whenever you apply to identity management, if you look at the best practices around identity management, some of them like very much enforced by Microsoft and other people, for example, multi-factor authentications, role-based access control, principle of least privilege account, then definitely using some sort of a like conditional access, so you can actually give them access from home or office and other thing. And also like use identity to manage as a like single sign-on. So these are all best practices. You can actually, Microsoft also has a security service which actually analyze these best practices and give you some sort of a score to improve your identity management and security overall. So it's very, very easy to manage from that perspective. If you look at some of the identity baseline sample policies, for example, there's a lack of access control. Then in case of a lack of access control, that there are ad hoc setting for RBAC controls, and unauthorized people can come into this and they can do some sort of unauthorized access to data as another thing. The policy statement which can mitigate this, that all assets should be assigned to a RBAC rule, and that to be approved by using some of the policies and other aspect. And you can always use RBAC controls and Azure Active Directory. Similarly, very common problem in companies is over provisions. Like I have seen that even if one person has a read access to all the subscriptions, so if that person lose their password, or then it's basically anybody can read everything settings in your things. To mitigate that, like the principle of least privilege and only elevate permission when you need it. So these things can be done by Azure Active Directory, least prevent, or like maybe just-in-time access for administration. So this is just a example of how you can define different risk and how you can define mitigation as a policy statement, and then how do you measure them. Then there are sample such policies. You can see that these are the identity policies, which again based on the same principle, like least privilege, elevated permission whenever you required, and conditional access, RBAC rules, multi-factor authentications, all the same good thing that we always recommend to use in case of these. So these are the ones. Once you finish identity, let's look to another discipline, which is the security baseline. And this is again discipline which give you information about the main establishing policies to protect the main assets, like your VMs, your network, your databases and other thing. How do you put policies? How do you define these security baseline? How do you document your risk and then tolerance for those risks? So again, it takes a lot of time to define these security baselines. Sometimes customers use external standards and they have their own policies. Then we have to map those policies back to the Azure security baselines. But primarily, instruments are basically using hybrid identity strategies, encryptions, and networking protections, and other things to manage these baselines. But these are like typical, again, potential activities to make sure that security baseline established. Encryption is one of the most important strategy for all cloud-hosted data and assets. Actually, there should be a policy encryption by default. So there is never a data or anything which is not encrypted, even in development environment. So encryption is most important, and we should have a standard and policy around it. Then how do we manage identity from security perspective? How do you manage our networking? Because networking is just a code. And finally, implementation of conditional access and least privilege principles in the cloud. If you look at the tools, and there are a lot of tools available for security, that's why I just want to add one slide to it. You can see that there are tools which are like Azure Key Vault, Azure Security Center, Azure Monitor, even networking monitor. All these things they have a component of security inbuilt, Azure AD logs and other thing. So this is just a simple table which will give you some idea about how these tools can be used for different purposes and other thing. And then simple identity policies, which again based on the same thing, that all protected data should be encrypted, the least cost and least privilege, no public facing IPs, a lot of these things. So in case these policies are in place, you can always use Azure Security Center to monitor these violation of any of these things and use it. Okay, so then we come to the last, the fifth and the last discipline of governance, which is deployment acceleration overview, and that is some sort of a a discipline which is very new in the cloud, like DevOps. With a lot more time, people call it DevOps. It is a discipline to establish policy to govern like how you how the assets are configured, how or deployed, and how much automated that part is, and knowing when the configuration or anything change. Uh, in cloud, that's why we define everything as a code, infrastructure as a code, and then we have a continuous integration and continuous deployment, CI/CD pipelines. The typical tools which we use to do this is definitely Azure DevOps and Azure DevOps in integration with repositories like GitHub. You can implement infrastructure as a code. Once you maintain your infrastructure as code, you can refactor and extend the same thing to support more complex workloads and other thing. So this will accelerate your deployment process. It will help you in managing code correctly. It will give you a continuous deployment and continuous integration part of it. And it's a really easy because you can do the whole process in the cloud, and supported by very good tools from Microsoft, which is available in form of GitHubs and other things. Just to understand again this part, I have again list down the tools, so you can see what are the tools available that you can use to build deployment accelerator. Again, the main tools are you can use Azure policies, Azure Resource Graph, and other things just to build these things. And all of these services also integrated with Azure DevOps, so they can actually work in those integration. They can actually enforce these policies. Then these are sample policies from deployment accelerators, like all should deploy it through a code or should be deployed using a template within an automation script. For example, no developer should go to the portal to deploy it. Then operation should be monitored, and there should be a set QA so people can actually find out in case of any failure. So these are the standard sample policies. So with this, like we have concluded our discussion around cloud governance. That how do you build a cloud governance by a policy, and then what are the 5 main disciplines of the cloud governance?